All in favor?
Down at the end of the table.
Motion by John and Evelyn, it was unanimous. And item number 1, moved by John, second by Evelyn, unanimous. Sorry about that. And we're on to the, go ahead, Ross, item,
Yep, on page 3 of your packet, it's a resolution request to transfer the program local matching funds for the FAA grants to the airport reserve account for the anticipated 2015 projects. As the 2014 projects have shifted into 2015, this request is to transfer the funds that were programmed in 2014 into a reserve account so they can be used in 2015. The requested amount of the transfer is for the remaining balance in that transfer account of $87,000.
okay, motion to get it on the floor by Fred, seconded by John, discussion. Hearing none, call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed, so moved.
Okay, under items of interest, I just want to let the committee know that we are putting the finishing touches on a new airport website. We expect to have that go live by the end of this week. If you get an opportunity, please take a look at the new website sometime next week. I'd be happy to hear any feedback that you might have. Under items of interest on page 4 of your pack, I included a copy of a letter from Rich Ayer to Carol Twist regarding operation of the new restaurant and cafe at the airport. I'm sorry to say that Carol has decided not to operate the new restaurant at the airport when it opens next summer. Carol has operated the airport cafe since July of 2008. She had quickly garnered a lot of loyal customers. She truly knows what good customer service means and has been a great asset in attracting customers from hundreds of miles away just to have a good breakfast or lunch. Everyone at the airport is sad to see her go, but Carol has opted to take a new business opportunity on Main Street in Hudson Falls, and I wanted to wish her the very best of luck at her new location.
When is she going?
This is her last week, so we will be without a cafe at the airport until the new restaurant is constructed.
Okay, and any timeline on the start? Have you guys heard anything?
Rich has indicated he hopes to have it open late spring, early summer, 2015.
Okay, so they are gonna do construction through the winter months?
I think he'll probably start as soon as he can break ground in the spring.
Okay.
Originally, he had hoped to start in the fall, but he couldn't shuffle things around in time to break ground.
Okay. Any other business come before the airport committee? Mark?
I just want to comment on the diner situation. I went out and had breakfast with about 6 pilots about 3 weeks ago. I saw Carol and thanked her for her service to the county. She ran a nice outfit out there. She basically isn't going to take Rich up on his offer because she doesn't want to get into the liquor license. She prefers to stay out of that at this point in her life. But these pilots were concerned about there not being breakfast service at the new restaurant. And that's an important thing for them. So is there going to be breakfast service at the new restaurant?
I don't know if there is or is not going to be breakfast service. I think whoever ends up being the operator of the new restaurant will be able to make that decision. The lease agreement is for a ground lease. I don't believe it stipulates whether or not they have to provide breakfast or lunch, but the existing FBO agreement does indicate that it's supposed to be provided. I don't know if that will apply to the new lease or not. They're really 2 separate leases, so that hasn't been addressed.
Okay. Well, at some point, I'd like to address that with these pilots. They like going out there on weekend in the mornings and having coffee and shooting the breeze. So that would be a big loss for them if there in fact wasn't breakfast, which is what they're hearing out there. The other thing, one of them, I'd like to check the contracts. There's something about having an actual dining facility in the main terminal building in the original agreement with the FBO. And does this new agreement supersede that? Is that the case? Can we have somebody check on that?
Well, I think it was, as far as superseding, I think it would be read
in sort of concert, with the two. I think it was understood that the restaurant would be moved out separately into a separate structure, and it wouldn't make sense for there to be a restaurant within the terminal and also outside the terminal. There may be some revisions to the FBO agreement that are required in a number of areas. This may be one of them.
Okay, well, I'd like to look into that. I had the two contracts and we were looking at it, and there seemed to be some confusion on what the obligations were per the agreement with the FBO. I will just say that these gentlemen are very, very concerned about this, and, it's maybe something, Ross, that you'd wanna talk to them. It's Hodgkins and Smith and Bosberg and Brazel and those guys. So, be good that maybe you could touch base with them and have a chat with them and maybe address their concerns.
I did speak with the Pilots Association at their last monthly meeting. Unfortunately, I don't believe at that time Carol had indicated whether or not she was going to operate the new cafe. So there wasn't really much of a discussion with the Pilots Association at that time. I'd be happy to speak with the pilots again, get their feedback, and again, speak with Mr. Skimmerhorn to find out what his intentions are for breakfast at the airport.
That'd be great, thank you.
Jeff, you had something to add?
Yeah, I just wanna add that I think, going into this, we know there's gonna be some modifications to the existing FBO lease. As Martin had indicated, I don't think anyone would have anticipated a separate restaurant lease and then a separate cafe within the terminal building. We are waiting to hear from, Rich Air on their specific proposal for the reuse of that cafe area, so we're anticipating that. So we'll certainly collect information on any concerns from the tenants or pilots at the airport. And then I think our goal would be to have, Rich Air, come to committee with their specific proposal on reuse of that cafe area within the terminal, building, and then they can address, what they know about how they're gonna operate the new restaurant. Maybe we can do that end of January for that meeting.
Okay. Fred?
I think the breakfast thing is important. I know in the past, and it probably still goes on, pilots from other areas will fly to an airport just to have breakfast and buy fuel and so on, so it's really a marketing thing too.
Yeah, it's always been a big part of Carol's business.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not sure what the business model is gonna look like for the new restaurant. I hope it does include breakfast. I think it's important, and I agree with the committee, and
I think it will, because just as
Yeah.
Fred said,
Yeah.
that's where the market is. There's
Yeah.
a strong
Yeah.
breakfast.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and she is done, once again, the end of this month?
This week, yeah, this is the last week.
This is her last week? Okay. So we should, I'm sure Rich will be responding to it. Anything else come before the committee? Travis?
I just wanna say that I did speak in favor of the restaurant when Mr. Skimmerhorn presented this some months ago, but there was never any mention of a liquor license, and that's true. I just heard it just a few minutes ago, so I have some concerns with that. I mean, this is county property. These are pilots. I mean, what are we gonna do? Put taverns up at the rest stops on the thruway? I mean, is that the next thing? I mean, it might be popular to go in and have a Bloody Mary, but you know, at an airport or at a rest stop, I mean, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I just wanna, I question whether or not that is sane. Thank you.
Martin, can you comment on that? Do you wish to now, or?
There is now, I think there always has been as proposed in the schedule of the insurances, with respect to the new restaurant lease, a schedule for, you know, liquor, license, and, sort of the tavern keeper's, liability. Can't say specifically, I mean, maybe Ross and Jeff can, but certainly always my understanding, and as evidenced in the lease itself, which has been around for some time, has been executed for some time now as well, that was the intention. It doesn't surprise me that if you wanna have a successful restaurant, you wanna bring people in from the outside, and maybe not just the pilots or the air people who are traveling at the airport, but say anybody else from the community. It doesn't sound surprising to me that you would wanna have the ability to serve liquor to your customers, so.
I'll add that it's actually pretty common. You know, some of their customers aren't necessarily pilots, they're passengers on some of those aircraft, and to order catering that includes a cocktail is not uncommon for, you know, the flying public in corporate aviation, so it's not an unusual thing or service for them to be providing at an airport.
John?
Yes, and, I think the intent of the restaurant is to attract, a wider audience, and you need liquor or wine for dinner and so forth to do that. But I wanna, you know, assure Mr. White's concerns that pilots don't drink and fly. I mean, even if it's available, that's like a big no-no, so I don't see that happening.
Anyone else have a comment? Anything else to come before the airport committee? Doug?
Maybe I'm a little premature, but, I noticed we have the public hearing set, Dan, so I appreciate that.
Yes, and that, thank you very much. The
That's
public
right.
hearing.
I didn't know if you were gonna, talk about
Well,
that.
yeah, 'cause I did forget it one other time, and I apologize. It's January 8th, 2015, at 6:30 PM. It will be at the Town of Queensbury Activity Center.
Thank you. The only thing I request, seeing that CNS failed to put in the last public notice, would that, could we ask them to put a larger public notice in and run it for 3 days consecutively, so that we definitely, allow the public to get the notice up in front, seeing that they forgot last time? Is there any way we can do that, or how does that work?
This would, I'm interpreting Supervisor Beatty's request to be in addition to the small technical legal notice. It's entirely up to the committee whether you would like to fund that. You'd need a resolution to authorize it.
Would we have to fund it, Paul, or could CNS fund it, seeing
Well,
that they failed
it's
to?
over and above the legal requirements. You're asking, right, for this?
Yeah, well, I just feel that as a county, seeing that they failed the first time to do it, or last time, that they should be required to, we could ask them, obviously, we can't require them, but we
right.
could ask them to put a larger ad in, run it 3 consecutive days. I think that's a fair request on our part, and to allow the citizens to actually, read the,
Certainly, we can request that. I guess I was interpreting that you wanted that no matter what.
Well, no, I would request that CNS do the right thing and adhere to that. So I guess that would be the committee's, up to the committee.
And would you be satisfied with if we gave that direction to Ross and Jeff to ask them to do that?
Yeah, I'd be
But you're not
satisfied.
mandating that in other words, I would ask for a motion from the floor to fund that.
I think, having Ross and Jeff request CNS to do that, I think they're fair people. I think they'd probably say, that's a fair request, and they'd probably do it. So I'd be satisfied with that,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
All right. Anything else to come before the committee?
Is that the consensus of the committee that you wanna request that?
I'd like to, make that request, they're, unfortunately, by not doing it, for the first meeting, we're having to do a do-over. That's at county expense, it's at all of our time and energy, so it would be a nice gesture on their part, so I support that.
Second it.
And Fred has seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Moved. So moved.
I just wanted to, if, Mr. Chairman, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff and Ross, that although you are having another public hearing in January, it's not as if that public hearing this fall didn't occur, and those comments that were received and made at that public hearing are accepted and will be and are made part of the official record, correct?
That is correct, and that information is also included in the new legal ad. The arrangements have already been made, for the legal ads to be placed in the Post-Star and with the North Creek News Enterprise. And within that ad, it does indicate that previous comments at the earlier public hearing will be incorporated into the final document.
The ad is also, the notice is also on the will be on the county's website,
Yes,
and
it will place on the county website.
and the report will be distributed at various locations, if you could add that as well.
That is correct.
What are those locations? The
Crandall-
library,
Yep,
town
Crandall
hall?
Library, Town of Queensbury Clerk's Office, the Warren County Clerk of the Board, and, what was the fourth location? City of Glens Falls, was it? I forget off the top of my head, but I believe there are 4 different locations.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I guess, I hadn't thought of it, but until Ross mentioned that the ads have already been submitted, there's a requirement on a lead time. I think if we want them to modify, I guess there would be a second round of ads if CNS agrees to do that at no cost. There would be a second round of ads. They wouldn't meet the, legal intent of the minimum notice required, before the meeting. But they, I guess, would perhaps.
Yeah.
That doesn't bother you, does it, Doug?
That'd be fine with me.
We meet the legal requirements, and if they wanna go ahead and do a separate, that satisfies what you're looking for.
North Creek News is a weekly publication, so unless you wanted to do 2 weekly publications with the North Creek News, I would assume that the 1 weekly publication would be enough, and then with the Post-Star, would increase it from 1 day to 3 days.
Correct, and a little larger if they could make it. So, from 1 to 3 days, and just a little larger ad, and the Post-Star, I would be satisfied with the Post-Star having a run. Because the Post-Star has 75,000 circulation, so if they have to do just one particular one particular page for Post-Star makes sense to me.
Okay.
I think I understand.
Travis?
A follow-on on the same topic. Back on September 10th, there was the previous environmental assessment on runways 12, 19.
Can you girls hear all right?
And at that time, we...
Could I bother you just to go to the mic, 'cause it's a difficulty hearing up here, and the girls just wanna get it for the record. Thank you.
Yeah, back on September 10th, we had the earlier EA, runways 12, 19, and 30. And I and a number of other people submitted questions at that time. It's over 10 weeks ago, and we have yet to receive any responses. I've asked Mr. Tennyson several times about that more recently. I actually filed a FOIL request because I just wasn't getting any definitive answer on that. And now I've been told that, taking full advantage of the 5 days to respond and 20 business days to, get back, and, all this is gonna, I think, become due in December 19th. My question is, you just mentioned that the questions for the second EA, the one that was held just about a month ago, would be available for public inspection at 4 different locations, et cetera. Will that be done prior to this next meeting, prior to January 8th, so that we can get some, answer to those previous questions?
Sure.
The approval process for the response to comments is, right now, sits with the FAA. It's really up to them as to when they're satisfied. They can do their internal review of those comments and responses.
But the
Yeah,
comments...
I guess I didn't mean to suggest that the response to comments would be available at those 4 locations. I meant to suggest that the EA, that is the subject matter of the public hearing, is available at those locations. That's all I meant to suggest.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would anticipate that there would be 1 response to public comments. There wouldn't be, redundant or, multiple versions of responses. I think, those comments will move forward. They will be incorporated into the EA. Regarding the first EA, I've responded to the request for, those responses and indicated that they would be made public when they are ready. They're not ready. There is no minimum or maximum timeline for those responses. My concern is that those responses are complete and accurate, and that's my only concern. I did respond that we would address the FOIL request as soon as we can, and that will be underway here, over the coming weeks. I don't know what more to say on it. The responses will be made available when they are complete.
I can suggest a few things to say. One of which is, were those responses, I think the first ones were prepared by McFarland Johnson, and the second set will probably be prepared by CNS engineers. Those are public documents. Whether they end up, being later incorporated into a document, a future document, it is still public record. They are FOILable. I've asked for them. I will ask for the CNS responses,
and I expect that, that I see them within the time frame, that FOIL, requires. Would there be any reason why, well, first of all, direct question, has M&J responded with, responses to those questions back, from September 10th?
I will certainly meet the legal requirements for the FOIL request.
There's a direct question, has M&J responded? to those questions.
There has been some interagency communication as well, as you requested in your FOIL request. Those things will be pulled together, we'll review it with the county attorney as to what's appropriate to respond to. They are still in draft stage, they are not complete, they are not public information, at least in their entirety.
I have letters from Bob Freeman that state otherwise, that merely calling it a draft, et cetera, does not change what it is. And if it is to be released at a future meeting, it should be releasable at the time you get it. You should not be able to hold that. And I'll involve Mr. Freeman again if I need to.
Okay, Martin, could you just address to Mr. Whitehead's concerns?
We can get back to him. I mean, as I'm listening to this, what's coming to mind is intra-agency privileges under FOIL, and I haven't looked at these documents, so I'm happy to talk to Jeff, talk to Ross, happy to provide a response as we always are. But you know, I'm not in a position to say that I agree that they're releasable. I just haven't looked at this legally yet.
All this legal mumbo jumbo.
Travis,
yes.
You asked a direct question.
I did.
We answered it, and do you have any other direct questions?
I do. This committee discussed after the July 1st hearing, when it looked like the people just sat up there on the DS and totally refused to answer any questions.
Do you have a direct question, Travis?
They addressed that question, and it was stated that maybe we feel that it's not a good idea to answer these direct questions until we get a chance to look at these. I don't think it was the intention of anybody here to go ahead and say, let's drag this thing out for 10 or 12 weeks to answer these questions.
I haven't heard a direct question yet, Travis.
Yeah. Well, you do the right thing.
I've heard your opinion and your statements, but if you have a direct question, fine, we can try to answer it.
I have another direct question. The Parks and Recreation Department went ahead recently and sent a letter to Mr. Tennyson asking him about the possible destruction of some sites that were marked as historical during the Runway 1 work. And my direct question is, have you responded to that request from Parks and Recreation to explain your actions?
The letter received from State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historical Preservation was referring to a contention that you had brought to their attention, that there was some issues with the obstruction removal project. It wasn't their notion at all. They just asked us that we respond, so we have responded.
Can I get a copy of that response? Thank you.
Thank you, Travis. Anything else come before the airport committee? Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two comments as I was listening to Mr. Whitehead. One is, I understand the need to be conscious of time. I did not think Mr. Whitehead was wasting any of our time, and I would ask respectfully, listen to what he has to say. He works very hard, and generally I found him usually to be right on things, and he's worth listening to. Number two, what we're really getting at here is transparency and an openness and a desire to have our questions answered. Those of us that are in opposition to the plans at the airport want nothing more than to be treated with respect and to have our questions answered. And so when we go to a public hearing and we don't have those questions directly answered, we're moving forward in a positive manner. Mr. Dusek had organized a meeting, and we agreed for the next public hearing that those questions would be answered, and if they were pertinent to the subject, they were. So we're moving forward in a positive manner, but those original questions that were still asked, there may still be some issues. So I would ask that we allow Mr. Whitehead to get off his chest what he has to say, and then, you know, we just address them, you know, accordingly. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to come before the airport committee? Having none, we'll move on to buildings and grounds. Okay, what do we want to start with, Jeff? Do you want to do?
Yeah, the first item we have on the agenda is a follow-up to some discussions we had last month regarding the municipal center and, security concerns and, proposals moving forward. So I have, Amy Clute here. She has, worked with Needham on their prior proposal and presentation that they had made a couple years ago, I think. I'll turn it over to Amy, and we also have, we've got Sean Lemery here as well, who may have some input as we go through, that discussion and presentation.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Jeff. As Jeff mentioned, recall that this issue of the municipal center security was discussed last month. I believe the county attorney brought it up and we all had some input on it. And from that, this committee generated Resolution 521 that went through the board last month and asked us to develop an action plan to enhance security at the municipal center. So I don't know how I got selected to be the one to talk to you. I might be because I'm the low person on the totem pole here, but I get to talk. If you need to throw something at somebody, throw it at these guys. Because I worked with Sean, the IT folks that were here a minute ago, Mr. Tennyson, Frank Morehouse. We all worked together to develop this proposal. On the resolution, it asks that we request Needham Risk Management to be here. I know Supervisor Gerard had addressed that and asked for that. Unfortunately, just because of the scheduling, the shortness of the scheduling, he had a conflict today. So again, he sent me in his place. But I have discussed this with Mike Needham. You know, he was in favor a couple of years ago, and he's still in favor of this. And I've also discussed this proposal with Lee Pollock of Rosen-Kiernan, our liability carrier, and they, of course, are also in favor. I'll try to turn the page. Where do I point it? I'm technically challenged. I point it in there. All right.
Just point at me and I'll click it.
Just a little bit of background to go over more than what we just talked about. You all know over the last several years, we've developed committees that study safety issues here. We developed emergency action plans both in this building and the other buildings. So we're really working on trying to make these buildings safer for our employees. We've done a lot of exercises, even most recently, that have increased the awareness and the potential emergencies that might exist in our buildings and how we're going to deal with them. These exercises also highlight our deficiencies in some areas, such as the security in this particular building. We've also now got, which we didn't have before, we have 5 years of success and a proposal much like this one, over at the Human Services Building, where we have one means of entrance through a secure, location. And just of note, interesting that, year to date, I talked with Pete Leone, the head of security over there. They've found 333 weapons trying to come through that location, including one handgun. So I thought that was an interesting statistic. Next page, please, sir. Our most recent concerns, you're all aware of these from last month's discussion. Unrestricted access to much of the municipal center. Unrestricted access to our basement areas in this building where we have a lot of very important mechanicals and other equipment. There's access to many of these areas when the building is open after hours for meetings. We've heard from our employees and department heads that they don't feel safe all the time in this building because of this unrestricted access. Of course, we've had, as everybody, an increasing number of workplace violence incidents in our facilities in recent years. This could just be a sign of the times, but it is increasing. And we really have a limited means of protecting our clients, visitors, and public when we do have an emergency. For example, the bomb threat at the Human Services Building, we learned that it was somewhat simple to call over to Mr. Morehouse and have him deactivate the fob readers so that the employees couldn't enter the building, and obviously the public can't enter the building. But what happens if a bomb threat happens here, or we go to lockdown? We don't have a really good way right now to keep that public from entering a building that might have an emergency going on. Next page, please. So let's look at the building, and there's a map on the next page, which we'll look at it in more detail. There's 19 doors in this building. 16 of those doors are in our county areas, so we got 3 over at the courts, and we're not even going to consider those right now. And I put there 9 doors currently allow unrestricted access. That's only because I couldn't count. There's 8 that allow unrestricted access, plus your probation that is a secured access. Then we have 7 doors that require a key that aren't general use. So if we want to flip the page to the next, you see a map here, and I know it's small on your handout, but the bottom of the map is the front of the building. The green arrow is your probation entrance that currently has the security feature. The resulting blue arrows, the 8 of them, are free open access where anyone can come and go. So from there, next page please, we came up with a recommendation as we were charged to do, and this would be to reduce the total number of public access points in the county areas of the building from 9 to 2. 6 of those would be employee entrances with a fob, and 1 would be keyed, that would be the mailroom. And we'll look at this on the next page in a moment. We propose to activate the existing fob readers to restrict access to the non-public areas of the basement, and then initiate additional security measures at the DMV entrance. So if we want to look at the map, I've now changed some of the arrows. The green arrows at DMV and at probation would be your secured entrances where your public would come and go and meet security staff there. The orange or reddish arrows would be an employee entrance where employees, such as myself or you all, would enter with a fob. And those fobs are what we use for the computers. If we work in the Human Services or over in the Sheriff's Department, we all carry these fobs. We just swipe it at the door and we can enter. The door unlocks. It's a magnetic lock. The purple door would be the mailroom at the dock there, and that would be keyed for use just by those that really need the key. So on to the next page, we have benefits. Short list, but a whole lot of benefits. We have increased employee safety. That's a given. We've restricted access, or we know who's in our building at any time. Obviously, we're keeping our visitors that are in the building. Those attending our board meetings should feel a little safer. I think the big one that we've overlooked, though, often when we've talked about this in the past, is an improved visitor experience. And you've probably all seen it. The little car in front of the building looking at the 40 signs going, I don't know where to drive to. We would get rid of those 40 signs. We would put one that says sheriff, courts, probation this way, all other services, or something of the like. It would be much simpler out on the ring road for folks to know where they're going. They come over, park at motor vehicle, and then they would either go to the human services building or the motor vehicle entrance. At both places, they would meet the greeter, which we call the security guard, who could direct them to the office they need. Maybe we even put up a kiosk, like at a mall, so that they could look at that and tell where they need to go. We've all got stories of somebody wandering this building because they didn't know where to go. So I think that we would improve our public's experience when they visit our building. On to the next page, what you really probably don't want to know is what it's going to cost to do this. Or you do want to know, you just don't want me to tell you it's going to cost anything. As we talk about the cost, I want you to think about the cost if we have an employee injury in this building. What am I going to pay out in workers' comp costs? What if we have visitors injured? What are we going to pay in liability deductibles? So think about that as we talk about these costs. We're going to need to give employees fobs. If we do this, you would all get a fob. But the good news is we have those on hand. We're going to upgrade the software for the fob reader. That's a little over $5,000. That is the software that controls the doors. I understand it's a bit antiquated from when it was installed, so we'd upgrade that. We recommend that we put cameras at the entrances and in the main hallways of this building, so we can have a station where they can be monitored. Equipment only on those is about $3,000 because we have an awesome IT director and his staff and building staff that can do the legwork and the labor on save. We've got to, if you do this, as we recommend, we'd modify the DMV entrance just a little, moving a glass door on the inside. It's glass work. We can't do that in-house, is my understanding. That's about $4,000. And of course, we would need a metal detector. Under New York State contract, $3,800 and change, one for the motor vehicle, and we'd ask for an upgrade at the probation entrance. My understanding is that metal detector is quite antiquated and not functioning properly, so to increase building security, we should have a newer detector. And those are all costs that are one time. We do this to get this done. The security officer coverage is an annual cost. We would need an additional officer to man the station at motor vehicle. There's one down there now. We would like 2. That's part-time, no benefits. And hot off the press this morning, the undersheriff told me that my $35,000 is not correct. It's actually going to be about $39,000, because it's a 45-hour a week, not just a 40-hour week. So as we move on from the costs, part of what we were charged was the plan, how we would do this. And our implementation plan, next page, please. Our implementation plan is in 2 phases. First, Mr. Tennyson will talk to you today about establishing a capital project, if you wish to move this forward, and identifying the funding for the personnel. We would hope that we would do phase 1, which would be to issue the fobs, activate the doors, and lock the magnet doors at the exterior doors in the basement, and install those cameras. And hopefully we would start that late this year, very early next year. Once that was done, we could move on to phase 2 on the next page, please. Next page, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, darn, he was ahead of me. Phase 2, this winter, probably late winter, perform the modifications at motor vehicle, get the magnetometer installed there, and then get the additional security officer on board. So with that, I'll open it up to discussion. If any of you guys think I forgot anything, please jump in.
Jeffrey, if I could just chime in, I think Amy had shown, for those of you that haven't been issued a county fob, it's this little piece of plastic. So most employees have them already, in part because we have the copier system that many of the departments have to use these same fobs in order to make a copy. These can be the same fobs that are activated on the doors. The other thing that they allow us to do, once we get away from the hard metal keys, the conventional, door keys, is if an employee leaves the county service for any reason, it's a simple, login, and Frank can deactivate their access immediately. We're not waiting to collect up another key or, something like that. So I think that's a great advantage, as well, once these doors are activated. The cost that Amy reviewed includes a little bit of hardware for the front entrance by the flagpole that does not have the fob readers now. And then it includes the software needed to activate the other fob readers that are virtually all installed in those areas that we wanna restrict access to. But the software that we currently have doesn't support that many readers, so by upgrading it, we'll be able to activate those other ones. This will, if implemented, the project would take a little bit of time. In short, just to program the fob would take some time and input from department heads on what type of access individual employees have. So for instance, department heads and key leaders in departments would likely have 24/7 access. These are the people that work late, they come in on weekends on a regular basis, and so we can control that through the software. Employees down through those departments may only need access 5 days a week during normal business hours, and we can restrict access to that. So that would take a little bit of time to do the programming. In the meantime, the hardware would be purchased, and we can begin installing the hardware necessary so that once everything's installed, then the fobs can be formally activated for those readers.
John?
I've been in institutions where the fob was built right into the ID card. We got a different system, or we can't do that, or?
Jeff,
Yeah?
I can respond to that.
Oh.
The sheriff's office has been using the same system for 10 years. Originally, when we had the system installed, it was built into our IDs that we wore around our necks. What we found over time is, through use, it would break down. It was just saying it has a reader built into it, and that's why I went to a hard plastic box, because to replace those IDs, it gets very expensive very quickly.
Yeah, well, I just thought it killed two birds with one stone, that you have to wear your ID because the fob is built in and it forces people to wear their ID. But, okay.
Jim?
You mentioned 39,000 for a security person. Is that a new cost, or is that an already established, are we gonna have to hire more security people?
I can respond to that. In December of 2013, the county had requested that we put a security post over by DMV and county clerk's office.
Right.
At that point in time, we did do a combination of part-time, it's not just one person, it's different people who work a couple days a week. Fill that position 45 hours a week. The cost was absorbed by the sheriff's office. We have some money in our budget to cover that. In order to cover an additional 45 hours, we currently don't have the funding in our budget to absorb that cost. So if you don't think of it as one additional person, it's 45 hours that we have to cover.
Someone else had Bud, did you have a question?
It's been answered already.
Jeffrey?
Have in this building that are in the unsecured areas. Obviously, as Amy mentioned, we're not really talking about courts, they're secured already, probation is secure on that end, but in those other areas, and I think the number was about 170, right?
173, I think.
173 employees right now that are in the unsecured area, so I said, okay, well, what's the cost for this security person? And so it's a little over $200 a year per employee to provide that additional security person. Right now, the security, forgive me if I'm wrong, Sean, but the security posts at the Human Services Building, is that carried under a sheriff's department expense right now?
We're reimbursed by social services.
Okay. So I guess one of the concepts would be, for consideration, would be if we would want to divide those costs among departments that are benefiting from the security guards over on this end, or at least maybe a reimbursement out of our 1620 code, which is our building code for this building under Frank's portion of the buildings and grounds budget, so there might be some transfers among there. And I guess along with that, any thoughts? I hadn't talked with Frank about this before, but would this adjust our maintenance in lieu of rent rate for anyone that's paying rent in this building?
It would affect public health and WIC, it wouldn't affect the courts. Yeah, it would.
So we might
would
be able
be
to
a
get a
percentage
portion of
built
those
in.
costs reimbursed
Right.
through maintenance in lieu of rent.
Okay, you have one of the first steps here, that's the capital project, which I assume would just be for the one-time costs?
Right, this would include the cost for Windstar to come in and, install and activate a couple more readers, install the additional software needed. It would include, the purchase of not just the one new magnetometer, but also replacing the probation magnetometer that is an older technology and due for replacement. So it would include those two costs. It would also include the cost for any building modifications. And then the camera system, which we think that $3,000 for the camera system is really kind of a force multiplier for those two security guards to be able to monitor the entire building. So that system would include exterior entrance monitors. It would include interior corridor monitors, both first floor and second floor. And it would address some of the concerns we have with the corners and the jogs in the hallways downstairs, where you've got a security guard on the extreme south end of the building who really can't see around the first corner. And so that would enhance their ability to really monitor the entire building section that is the center and south section of the municipal center that is right now unsecure.
Okay, so we're looking at the one-time cost of, in the vicinity of $20,000, that would be the capital project that we need to establish, and secondarily, we have a $39,000 annual, salary cost that I would assume we move on to finance.
Correct.
And the capital cost, any ideas outside of the reserve, is that where we need to go with that?
That would have to be moved on to finance unless Jeff had the money in his budget.
I think we do have some money left over in Frank's budget. This has been probably the worst of all years as far as moving money around. So we're scrounging every last penny out of all of the DPW codes to make sure our expenses are covered. I think we have some, it looks like right now we have some excess in a electricity code that we could transfer out of our A1620 code. I think, as I spoke briefly with the budget officer about this, before the meeting, I think we'll know more, by finance as to how much we think we'll have remaining in that. I'm thinking that we'll be able to provide a large portion of that $20,000 install cost out of our existing 2014 budget, and then the remainder, would likely come, I guess it'd be up to finance, but there is, 30 or 40,000 left in contingency for 2014, so that would be the likely next spot to look. But I think we'll know more as we work through our final transfers and make sure all the journal entries are in and done by the treasurer's office, so we have an accurate accounting, and then make sure all our final invoices and payments, and then project our final expenses through the end of the year, which is challenging sometimes on the utilities and the snow and ice expense side, as well as the overtime side for all of the staff. But I'll have better information by next Wednesday, certainly.
John?
What would we do with the old magnetometer? I mean, I guess it's too old, we can't rehab it. Can you trade it in and they reuse some of the parts to build a new one, or what?
John?
I spoke with, the company out of Long Island that we purchased the ones in the Human Services Building from. They're on the state contract. They did not express that they would have any interest in the old one. They basically said it's antiquated. And just so the committee members understand how old this is, if you literally walk and just tap this metal detector, it sets off an alarm. The one that we put in the Human Services Building, it has what they call pinpoint technology. The security officer actually sees a diagram on there, and if it gets an alert, it tells you where to look on the person. And then you have to use a wand, a secondary wand, to figure out what this person has on. This one, it beeps or it doesn't beep, it doesn't tell you where to look, it doesn't tell you if they have something by their ankle, on their waist, in their chest. They did not express an interest that they would want it. I don't think it has any value.
So, We take it to the dump?
Whatever the county would like to do with it.
No, I'm just, sometimes these electronic recycling places, they have these big magnets in them and stuff that may have some value, but I guess I'm nitpicking.
Well, on something like that, just so the committee knows though, that we do have, our purchasing agent is responsible for seeking out, whatever revenues we can get from, materials that are no longer needed by the county. She sells on eBay, she'll look into, if eBay doesn't work, she can look into recycling. There's all kinds, but she always looks to see if we can get any revenue out of the, surplus material.
Jim?
Yeah, as we're talking, I'm thinking back to schools, the way school system works is if there's a breach, I mean, they have the perimeter secured, but they also have it that if someone breaks in, you know, there's a breach or whatever, that the teachers can lock the door. Do we have that? I mean, what is taking that into account for?
Amy?
That is addressed in our emergency plan and in our training. And any employee that senses a breach or an intruder has the ability to use their telephone to call for a lockdown. And then we have procedures for lockdown where everyone can lock their doors.
Everybody has a key already? Or?
Everybody has the means to lock their doors. It's different whether it's a keyed door or a push button lock or, yep. Yes, that's been addressed.
Art?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sean, can you just clarify, is there gonna be one or two security guards?
What we proposed, I spoke with, Keith Leon, who's the security supervisor, and Lieutenant Lee Personnel supervisor, and explained to him what we were looking to do, and he said ideally, they would like to have 3 people there, so you have, they anticipate that's gonna be an extremely busy entrance, more so busy than the human services building. They tell me that there's a huge influx in the summertime, people coming from downstate up here to use the DMV to register their vehicles or what have you. So we settled at 2. The reason it's really impossible to do it with one person there, one person's gonna be running a magnetometer, and you're gonna have traffic coming in, traffic going out. It's a lot for one person to do. If you have a second person there, it helps alleviate that load. The other thing is, it allows for that second person, if they need to respond to an issue someplace in the building, they can do that. If you have one person there, they can't leave that post.
Gotcha. Second question, who's gonna monitor the cameras in the entrances and halls?
What we had proposed is that it would be monitored by security personnel. And what's important to know is not only would it be monitored by security personnel over here by the DMV entrance, but there would be a mirror image of those screens over probation at the entrance that we came over there as well.
Okay, so that's all covered, we've got that end of it.
That's correct.
There's no.
Speaking with Mike Colvin, who could maybe better expound on this, we would be able to access that system remotely from the sheriff's office, whether it be the communications center or somebody in administration. If there was a problem over here, we could pull it up remotely.
Okay, and that'll all be covered, there won't be additional expenses for that part?
No, and,
All right.
I think it's important for the community to know that we've looked at a company to come into the sheriff's office, and, the option that Mike Colvin offers is substantially cheaper. It is probably about $80,000 to $90,000 for the sheriff's office. I brought the company through here last evening, had a look at the layout, brought them through the basement, the second floor, first floor. They haven't given me a price, but I guarantee you that it's not gonna be anywhere near $3,000.
Gotcha, thank you.
Jeffrey?
One other thing I want the committee to be aware of is, at the department head meeting, last week, I did bring this up at the end of the meeting to make sure that department heads were aware that if this proceeds, that I'm gonna need a lot of their input regarding the fob access, as I mentioned, and really, I want department heads to be able to designate, the access for their employees to make sure there's no operational impacts, for their access. But I asked them to come to me or one of the team, the working group that's been kind of developing this plan, to make sure that if there was any concerns, we could address them, or that we were aware of them, so we didn't get blindsided. I did have, one department head contact me, and, that was, Kate Johnson of Tourism. Her concern really was, you know, access to her, the brochure rack down, in the center of the hallway. And, what I talked with Kate about, and she seemed okay with, was that once if this proceeds and we modify the DMV entrance, that we're gonna free up some space down there by shifting some things around and by modifying some of the interior door space, at the county clerk's office, which, by the way, they're on board with. So we might end up, putting some wall-mounted racks down there, to have public access to her brochures. The other thing that I'm anticipating is, as with the directional signs out on the ring road, bringing everyone to the DMV entrance or to Human Services, and they'll be parking in those two lots, is I would anticipate developing some type of, facility map, kind of like a kiosk you'd see, like at Aviation Mall, indicating if, you're here and if you wanna go here, so that people have, quick and easy directions. And I know the security guards on a regular basis in the Human Services building assist people, where you're going, and can direct them to the proper floor and side of the building. I'm sure the security guys will do that at the DMV entrance as well, but if they're busy, they can refer them to the map, and they can take a look at the map and know directly where to go in the building.
Okay, anything else? Could we get a motion to set up a capital project for some $20,000, made by John, seconded by Mark? Any other discussion? Fred?
Yeah, I guess I just have a concern about, creating a fortress in this building. Local government buildings have always been open to the public. All the town halls are open to the public. We have other facilities, the DPW buildings, that aren't gonna be, turned into fortresses. And I think it makes sense to have some of the doors locked and have one entrance, but, putting in a magnetometer to come to renew your license at DMV, I just think is overkill, and I'm not really in favor of that aspect of it. I don't have a problem with, locking some of the doors and having one access, but, having worked in the court system where we had 5 court officers, and you had pan and zoom cameras throughout the building and even outside, and, you just always got the sense if someone was out to, do you harm, they would just do it in the morning before you came in, or at lunch when you go out to lunch, or at the end of the day when you walk outside. So I think it really gives you a false sense of security to do all these things. So I'm not really in favor of it.
Anyone else want to comment from the committee? And Mark?
While I was sitting here, I emailed NISAC, actually do use metal detectors. As I was sitting here, a sign of our times, but Fred makes a good point. You've got a 75-year-old woman who comes here to renew her license, and she's not a threat. Is this really gonna provide us with the security? And that's where I defer to the law enforcement officers. But I thought it would be worthwhile to hear what NISAC had to say. I asked them if they had a policy statement, 2 counties. Paul, you may know, do they issue a recommended safety policy for their member counties?
I don't know, but I can certainly look into that.
Okay, I just sent Mark Levine a note and asked him if so I defer to you on that. I think Fred makes a worthwhile point to consider, before we just go forward with it.
Doug, you wanted to comment?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I concur with Fred. I don't want this to be a fortress. In fact, it came to my attention when we Googled justice statistics from 2002 to 2009, workplace violence is down 35%. It's not up, it's down. So, yeah, they get sensationalized, and yeah, it gets a lot of publicity when something happens, but the actual statistics are saying something different from what we're led to believe. So, I don't want to turn Warren County into a fortress. I don't want to me, we should be open and engaging and not putting up officers there. I believe that's, and I don't want to, I believe that's more than what I would feel comfortable with. So I would concur with Mark and actually Fred, that I think we need to scale back a little bit from this total project. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Doug. Evelyn?
I understand Fred and everybody else's concerns, but when I think about my experience having gone into the human service building, now there's an area where we do have usually 2 guards and a magnetometer, and there are a lot of people using Office for the Aging, they're going upstairs to get petitions, maybe they're going to get a building permit, obviously they're not there with any nefarious purpose, they're just regular folks. I've seen a lot of people come and go from there, I've never known it to deter anyone. They seem to take it pretty much in stride. It's commonplace, I guess would be the best term for it. They go in and out, they seem to use it well, they use the facilities well. So, I guess I don't see where it would deter or intimidate people from using the DMV. I mean, certainly because we do generate a significant portion of revenue by getting people to use our DMV as opposed to online, we want to continue that. But I don't know that I think that it would deter folks looking across the ring road at the human service building and what goes on there each day versus over here. Certainly we don't want to be Fort Knox and, seem inaccessible, but it certainly hasn't deterred people from using the facilities over there, and I just don't see how it would deter them from using it over here.
I guess I just saw this differently. I did not see the magnetometer at the entrance to the motor vehicle. I saw it where the security officer is now. And so I envisioned it that way. If people want to go to motor vehicle, fine. If they need to go to deeds and records, fine. But if you've got to go down this hallway, for what reason do you have to go down this hallway? It better be valid and have some kind of security. I think the employees expect some kind of security, at least in that end. So I envision this as a little bit differently than Fred did. I understand Fred's point of view, and I didn't see it that way. I saw it a different way. So imagine that we're talking about limiting access to parts of the building where maybe the public shouldn't be. I agree with Fred in that maybe we shouldn't be limiting access to the parts of the building where the public should be. So I pictured the magnetometer in a different place than he did.
I just have a question for Sean. The magnetometer that exists for the courts, there was how many pieces of dangerous equipment collected? 300?
Judge Greengate, it was a very high number that the courts had grabbed. I know that over the Human Services building, we were up to 333 items this year. And when I spoke with Pete Leone, the majority of those items are box cutters, knives, things of that nature, and totally forgot that it was in his briefcase. I guess to address the committee's concerns, if I lined 5 people up here and I had them dressed normally, could you tell me who has a weapon on them? Could you tell me who has a gun on them? And we're not trying to treat people like criminals, but what we are trying to do is enhance the safety of the people that not only visit the building, but the people who work here as well. It's certainly not the intent of anybody that put this plan together to turn. Unfortunately, if you look at what has happened in the school systems, it took some tragedies to make the changes that you see in schools. You just can't walk into a school room.
Fred?
I mean, I guess I see it differently, that we all, working for the county, serve the public, and I think it sends a very bad message to say that we need to be protected from the public. I think the court system is very different because in the court system, you're dealing, especially in family court, with very emotional issues, and it makes sense to make sure that someone is not bringing in the county doesn't rise to that level. And then it begs the question, what are you going to do in the other buildings, the outbuildings in the county? Are we going to, have security in all those buildings? Don't those employees deserve the same kind of protection? I hate to see us convey the message that we need to be.
Mentioned that the working group had discussed this quite a bit, and the concern has been really the inconvenience. Okay, what can we do to alleviate any of the inconvenience that would be caused? There's certainly a little bit of inconvenience. You only have one parking lot or 2 that you could go to, and county employees and supervisors alike would have to make sure you have your fob or wait or knock on the door until somebody knows you and lets you in, I guess. But one of the things I asked Frank, and I don't know if Sean has any information on any complaints, but, you know, we've been operating the Human Services building for about 5 years now, and everyone that goes in that building either is a county employee with a fob and they're entering one of the back doors, or they're coming in through security. I go through security all the time, and haven't had any issues, and I haven't had any complaints regarding the multitude of people that go through there. I think one of the challenges is to keep it efficient, to keep it running smoothly. One of the things that we looked at in the DMV entrance, was a way to make sure that we have enough space to flow traffic in and out, and so that we're not jammed up and creating a cramped space there. And I think we worked out a solution with moving the access into the county clerk's office over to give us that space, to make sure that it's efficient flow, and, so that they can move through security quickly and then wait in the DMV office. And so that has been one of our concerns. I think we've addressed it, at least from a convenience standpoint. And I know Frank hasn't gotten any complaints in Human Services. I haven't either regarding access. I don't know, Sean, if you have any comments from your security guys.
Any complaints since the new building was put up? And so the committee understands, prior to that, we were providing security across the street at the annex when the DSS was located over there.
Jim?
Yeah, I understand Fred's point, and I can remember a time when you could walk into a school, you could walk, we used to cut between buildings and do all this stuff, it was very open, and, I mean, who would ever expect a school to be like a fortress? I mean, you go in now, you have to buzz, go into one room, then into another, and it's a whole different ballgame. But it's because there are people out there who have mental problems, and they wanna create a commotion, and they somehow want, like the one that did it at Sandy Hook was trying to beat the people at Columbine, the number of, I mean, there are reasons that are totally irrational. And my concern would be that we're having a board of supervisors meeting and somebody decided to show up and be on TV. I mean, it's just, you know, I hate to see us go this route, but you have to now think of the possibility of what would happen if it happened. I mean, it's out there. I mean, we know for a fact that people are doing these things, and we have to anticipate it. It's just, it may not happen here. Two seem to go together, and I hate to see us go this route, but it's gonna happen.
This, a similar argument happened a couple of years ago when it was presented, and I understand everybody's feelings. But for right now, what's before us, it seems there's, I don't think anyone has trouble with the fobs, Fred, is that?
Right.
That
Yeah,
seems to
that's
make
fine
sense
with me.
now, and even that was a problem previously, but, the fobs are in, and so I guess where we're at is, do we want a magnetometer, and then that would also be inclusive of another guard, et cetera. And I guess what we need as a committee is to have a vote to send it on, and I'm sure there'll be discussion at the full board when this comes up, and, you know, we'll have the same arguments, et cetera, and we can have a vote of the full board. But right now, why don't we try voting on the whole package with the magnetometer and the extra officer, and if we could have a motion to bring it to the floor?
Don't we have a motion in a second already? I think we just need to vote.
We have the motion on the 20,000 capital.
Yeah.
That was for the 20,000,
We
correct,
voted on
okay,
that.
was the annual cost, and that's inclusive of the magnetometer,
Yeah.
okay? So, why don't we,
If we could vote on everything except the magnetometer, I'd vote yes, but if it includes the magnetometer, I'm gonna say no.
yeah, what I'm looking for, Fred, is not to circumvent, but to see if the majority of the committee wants to move it forward, then we find out what the majority of the full board, and I guess finance, it'll be discussed in finance also. So it could run in the loggerheads in finance if there's a different discussion and a different outcome committee-wise. Is that making sense?
Yeah, it does, and I'm okay with voting for the funding, but I would like further exploration of the magnetometer, just to, I'd like to see what NISAC says, I'd like to see what other counties are doing. the school analogy is relevant, but they don't have, you know, metal detectors at the schools, they have one here at the door. At least that's what Queensbury has.
Yeah.
They don't have metal detectors.
Maybe not Lawrence.
So I'd like to, this is the first that this has really been presented to us as a committee, and before we just jump forward and say absolutely unequivocally, I'd like personally to think about it a little more.
Yeah, and I,
They would vote for the funding to get
yeah,
started.
and I think you would have time, and then, when we got to the full board, we still could make modifications. If the majority were not in favor of a magnetometer, that would rule that out. I think the fobs would still go in, but it also would have, probably, ramifications for the security officers, correct? You wouldn't need two. So at that time, there would be a modification, or I guess I would call it a downgrade from the full, what we're moving forward if it passes this committee. Is that,
Okay.
Jim?
Yeah, there could be a compromise where instead of having it at the beginning to get into DMV, that they say there, people object to having going into DMV, but they put it where you come into the rest of the building.
But for the sake of moving forward and giving all the options presented to the 20, I would
You
just,
could vote yes, but then, say we do have a magnetometer, you can move it to where John's saying, and you're spending more money, but it sort of does what Fred wants.
and that could be something that could be brought up at the full board and modifications. So, are we good with voting? Okay, call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed?
No.
Okay. And then secondarily, the security officer, how do we wanna handle, do we wanna move that forward to finance also?
You'd have to get it to finance.
So conjunctively, we move that to finance, could we have a motion
I'll move
to
it
do
forward.
that by Evelyn, second? We have a second for it. John, any other discussion on moving that forward? Okay, call the question, all in favor? Aye, opposed?
No.
Okay, so that will go to finance, correct?
Correct.
And they'll have discussions on it, and then it should end up in, at the full board, and we'll see where we ended up at that time. All right. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Okay, I'll turn it over to Frank. We've got a series of, annual contracts to address.
Mr. Chairman, the first contract is with BPI Mechanical. They were low bid on a HVAC service contract. This is used only if we can't handle something in-house. I don't believe we've used it at all in the last 5 or 6 years. Countryside has used it a few times, and it comes up periodically that we need more expertise in certain
Okay.
areas.
It's moved by Evelyn, seconded by Fred. Any questions?
Now, this is,
This is the,
HVAC.
oh, this is just the HVAC?
Yes.
A second.
30 seconds.
Oh, okay. I'll
Third.
vote for it.
okay, call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
opposed? So moved.
On page 6, there's a, Stericycle, as part of the solid waste and recycling. This is the only company that bid on medical waste removal. That's through the nurses' public health department.
Okay, could I have someone move that? Evelyn, seconded by Mark. Any discussion?
Well, I do have a discussion, I don't know if it applies to this, but at least in the dumpster rental and collection and the septic cleaning and pumping, which I get contract, if we sell Westmont, that negates our contract here?
Good question. What we've, been trying to accomplish is with contracts that ring Westmount, you know, we, actually, it was at the county administrator's suggestion, we've been, cognizant of that, and we're putting provisions in these contracts that relate to Westmount and the sale of Westmount, and that the county's ability to either get out of the contract altogether, sign the contract, which we always have the ability to do, or modify the contract in part with respect to the services at Westmount. So the thing is, supervisors, is to make sure that the contractor is alerted to the fact that during the term of the contract, the level or quantity of services may change depending upon what happens with Westmount. So that's the goal, and that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Oh, okay.
Okay? All right,
Thank you.
so, aye, opposed, so moved.
Good on that part.
A motion to approve. Motion by Evelyn, seconded by Fred. Discussion? Call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Page 12 is Stone Industries. This is for, routine pumping and cleaning of septic systems, which we don't use too much. That was more the WIC building and the detention home for us.
Mark, second by John. Discussion? Call the question, all in
And, inspections on the elevator in the municipal center only. The, HSB is still covered under a warranty, an extended warranty. So this would be for our elevator in this building.
Okay, motion by Evelyn, second by John. Discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved.
Sure, the next item's on page 19. This is for our, periodic engineering services. This contract has been an annual contract as a standby, for any of our building systems to include architecture, HVAC, electrical, and, we had 7 respondents to the RFP. We're recommending award to Clark Patterson. You'll see on page 20 and 21 are, this is a labor rate type contract, as an on-call architectural, type engineering service.
Okay, motion to get it on the floor. By Fred, seconded by Evelyn. Discussion? Mark?
Is this the annual contract with Clark Patterson that we referenced when we, chose them as the engineering firm for the court system? Is it the same contract, Jeff?
Yes.
And the, 7 bids that came in are here somewhere?
Yes.
And, what's the, having never seen the bids before, or the summary, what's the rationale for choosing them over the 6 other companies?
What
They were
we
low
do-
bidder?
Right,
Not in every category.
It's a unit rate, contract, so, what we do is we do an analysis on a typical, project and the hours that those individuals would spend on a project, and that's how we compare those. Each of the bidders are required to, submit a clause package to make sure that they're qualified, for the nature of this work. And then what we do is, on this contract and some of our other term engineering contracts is, as a project comes up or we need their assistance, we, develop a scope of services where they lay out the exact number of hours, by title that would be involved to complete the project work, and then, as long as we have the budget for it, we authorize the work through a letter of authorization, which I have to review with my engineering staff.
In some cases, it appears that this Fusco Engineering is less expensive than some of the others.
Yeah, most of them.
Right, and it is a little bit difficult in that, when you consider, for instance, the principals on the projects, the principals are only charging minimal hours to any project. The bulk of the work is completed by the staff engineers, the drafters and the technicians. And, so there's an analysis that we do as part of the bid that, balances that out in proportion to the normal number of hours on a typical
Yeah.
engineering project.
Is that analysis in here?
It's not in here, no.
That would've been helpful.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, based on what Jeff just said, is that each one of the firms submit a unit cost for whatever position it may be. The positions that we list in there are the ones that are DOT list for most of their projects. Again, we do a rating system, 100 points, and as Jeff just said, like a principal might count for 2 points because typically principals aren't that much part of a project. Typically they're there for a meeting. The normal, positions that are used for most consulting engineers are assistant engineer, project engineers. We rated those a little bit higher. I think on, actually I don't think it's in there.
based on that, and typical historical data that we have here in the county with all the projects that we've done, Clark Patterson wound up being, with that analysis and the individuals that are normally used, the lowest consultant.
Mark?
When they're blanks, what does that mean?
Well, the way that we looked at it with the blanks is that they didn't, and there's two ways of looking at it. The way we looked at it was to be fair, is that if they didn't put a position in or didn't put a rate or a value in, then we assumed that they would use the next person in line. Say if they had a senior engineer, no rate listed for the senior engineer, they'd use the managing engineer. So if there was a rate for a managing engineer, that's what we put into the senior engineer as well.
Part of why this is developed like this with these titles is different firms call their employees different titles. Some have, you know, engineer 1, engineer 2, engineer 3. Well, that doesn't mean a whole lot when you compare it to another firm that has an assistant engineer, a senior engineer, a staff engineer, and a technical, you know, technician or engineering technician. So what we do is when we establish those titles, we refer to the industry standard titles, and each of those titles has a kind of a standard experience level, a standard certification level. So as the consultants bid on this, they place their employees and their unit rates into those standard titles, so that there is a comparable level of experience for a senior engineer, and that's why we refer to those standard industry titles.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm looking at Jason, which is a Warren County company, and they look, I mean, just at face value, pretty competitive. And I only know them by reputation. Their reputation's outstanding.
Based on the analysis that we did with Supervisor Westcott, they were competitive, but they, based on the criteria that we used for the analysis, they were not the lowest.
Okay, like John said, it would be helpful to see that analysis. I'm not prepared to vote today on this. I don't feel as though we have complete information to make an informed decision.
John, do you want to see any more data on how they calculate?
Yeah, I'm looking through this and I'm confused because everything I look at, I can see somebody that's less expensive. But if there's an analysis that says, you know, what I'm seeing, you know, if I was to look at this on face value, I'd say that Clark Patterson appears to be one of the more expensive ones. But maybe I don't have the advantage of seeing the analysis.
Okay, we can table it, and do you want to provide?
Yeah, and I think I understand the concern completely, and it's a weighted analysis, and that's what Kevin was alluding to on the typical projects. You know, even though that principal may be 50% more than a principal from another firm, they're charging, you know, 1 or 2 hours a month on a project. They're reviewing some overall work products or contracts or invoices versus a staff engineer level where those are the ones that are doing, you know, a 40-hour week on a project. So we can certainly provide that weighted analysis and how that factors into the overall cost of a project.
Well, to Supervisor Westcott, oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, go ahead, Jim.
To Supervisor Westcott's point, you know, some of these are in town and some of these are out of town. Is there other expenses other than what we're seeing, such as travel expenses that might be involved?
There are some authorized travel expenses, right, Kevin?
There are.
The contract, right. Yeah. And we do normally factor those in, you know, on a typical project, but now, frankly, nowadays, when it comes to engineering, there's a lot that's done, you know, over the internet, and other than the initial field work, most of these firms are doing the bulk of their work back in their offices.
Evan?
I know Julie's involved through purchasing for a lot of these bid things. Now, does she participate in the review and the weightings? So I'm sure she would have information as well. Maybe it'd be useful if we're gonna come back to maybe have Julie stop in and kind of explain. I'm sure this happens with more than just this kind of bid. I'm sure we do it countywide
Yes.
more often.
Right, and it is a challenge, because these are bids or RFPs that are made quite flexible, in that we establish those rates, and then, when the board directs action on a certain project, that we don't have, frankly, I don't have architects in-house, I don't have electrical engineers, other than a simple, maybe a 200 amp service, we could probably do some design work in-house. But we have, major systems in our buildings that we don't have the expertise to do, major HVAC and plumbing, so these are on call, we establish the rates by contract so that we can immediately move to action. So one of the challenges is to be able to create an award system, and that's what we've done over time. That's how we've done it, on each of the years we've had one of these term contracts, is we've developed a weighted average, based on the typical, work products, and that's how we've awarded.
Now, Mr. Remington, Lamy, and Jeff, over the course of my tenure, with the involvement that, Clark Patterson and different things that they've looked at, from the jail to court systems, and then the needs assessment, they've collected data that certainly was helpful now, and their expertise and I'm sure all the engineers have expertise, but with some of their experience, does that go under consideration or get credit for their, in other words, they had some data that was valuable that we paid for at one time, that gets it gets applied towards some of what we are doing just recently.
Yeah, that's not actually part of our analysis on this as we renew these contracts. We certainly look at each of the firms to make sure that they meet our minimum standards, and that we believe that they have the expertise and the staff to conduct the work. So it's more of they must meet a certain bar. Certainly Clark Patterson has met and exceeded that bar from the prior experience, but once they achieve that, the way this bid was a unit rate type bid. So that's how we handled it.
Okay.
As far as prior work product, anything that we've paid for in the past is ownership of the committee.
Okay, so
or of the board.
so we're entitled to that data
Yeah.
and for, okay.
So it's not really part of the analysis, other than the fact that certainly if we'd had issues with Clark Patterson, we probably would have found fault in their proposal, and that if we had had prior issues or, if we'd have terminated a contract in the past because of performance issues, certainly that would have been addressed as part of the proposal process. That's simply not the case with Clark Patterson.
Okay, so you can get us the data and and then we'll bring it up is next meeting fine?
Well, our existing contract will expire end of December. The only thing that's underway right now that Clark Patterson is working on, there's a couple things. There's obviously the courts project and the RFP proposals. They've got a solar expert that has been assisting us on the technical portions of those reviews. So normally what we've done is if there's ongoing work that is extending duration, then we'll normally keep those running. Might be a provision for us to extend at least a matter of a few months. If the committee's okay with us extending the existing contract, we won't have any hiccups with our current projects, and that'll give us more time to bring the analysis to committee for review.
Mr. Chairman, sometimes in the contract, but not always, and I don't know, I've looked at the CPL contract before, but not on this particular point. Sometimes there are, extension provisions where if you haven't agreed upon a new contract by the time the contract expires, that it can be extended for a period of time, say 3 months or something like that, but not knowing specifically whether or not that's in the contract. You could, for continuity purposes, because it doesn't sound like with your committee process like you're going to get around to this before the end of the year. It doesn't sound like it. I could be wrong. But you could, irrespective of what the contract says, authorize or at least entertain some short-term extension. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that, given that your contract is expiring. A short-term extension of the current contract, but that would have to be obviously approved here and have to be approved by Clark Patterson Lee as well.
It only looks like we would be able to make a decision in January, correct? We have it. So Fred?
Make a motion, extend it for 30 days, cover that.
It's through January 31st.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing is that your board meeting's gonna be in mid-February for that.
60 days then.
Yeah, that would do
Right
it.
here, 90.
I would recommend 90, thank you, Supervisor
90.
Westcott, because
Maybe.
if we present it end of January, the board passes it in February, there's still a certain amount of time to prepare contracts, sign contracts, get those executed, so I think certainly through the end of March, we're safe, where there wouldn't be any undergap. I would just hate with all of the work that we have going on and some critical timelines on some of that work, if we have a hiccup, simply just because a contract terminates, I think we're safer going with a 90-day extension.
Okay,
90's fine with me.
so make that motion, Fred, and
Yes.
second? Second by Mark. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, then the Lower Warren Street.
Mr. Chairman, I had a request from Mr. Finger, who was renting the, recycling center down on Lower Warren Street. He would like to install an outside wood boiler and, heat exchanger on the inside of the building, which would help lower his cost for heating the building. His idea is that he could burn the wood pallets that come into the recycling center. It would have to be subject to review by, I'm sure, codes and
Any discussion?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it would be helpful if you.
Yeah. Are there any City of Glens Falls ordinances that apply? Would he need to get a permit from the city? Is there any DEC permit that would be required? I know some municipalities have very strict regulations about these outdoor wood boilers and where they can be and where they can't be and how high the stacks have to be, et cetera. I know that from past experience. I don't know whether the city has anything like
I
that.
think this is in Queensbury, correct?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's
On
in
the
Queensbury?
Sebagagi
Okay,
property?
so Queensbury.
Glens Falls is Warren Street, when it turns to Lower Warren, it's Queensbury.
Okay.
But you're right, though, they have, with the outside wood boilers, they do have, and I'm sure Queensbury is addressing them.
Oh, yeah, building and codes is pretty strict.
I think he's looking more for a conceptual, approval or denial, and then, you do what's necessary to comply, if the committee is receptive to it.
Mark?
So he just wants to know whether or not we're okay with it, subject to, applicable laws and approvals and all that stuff, reviews. And it's just a way for him to power his business, and that's his chosen energy source.
A couple questions. It would be located outside. Is that another area that he would need? And then the storage of wood for the loading, et cetera? And
I think that's all part of what, he needs to develop and come back. I think, to go with what Frank was saying, he doesn't wanna pursue this if this is gonna be an absolutely not. So I think, if the committee's okay with it moving forward, we would require a, detailed, cut sheets on what he wants to install, a site plan and installation plan on where and, how he's gonna install it. Certainly, if there's additional space needed outside of his current leased area, we would have to incorporate that into a lease modification. We would require that he meet all, locals, and state and federal codes if there's any, but, there are some restrictions that the DEC has implemented on, outside wood boilers. So we would require them to meet all of those things. We would review it, with our engineering staff here in-house, be back to committee with a recommendation. I think we've also done similar things on other leased properties where we've allowed an installation like this with a provision that, okay, in the end of your lease, we might require you to remove it and restore it to the original condition. We can certainly incorporate that
Yeah.
into, anything that we forward.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's an important component, because I think as part of this, it's the first I'm hearing of it, which is fine, but I think as part of it, I would have to review the lease and have to review some underlying documents there. I know there's some very strict requirements about what can and can't happen on that property, so that's something I'd be happy to look at and report back to Jeff.
Okay, what, Evelyn?
I just wanna point out, I don't know who's familiar with wood boilers or not, but a lot of the outdoor wood boilers, the lines that come out of the back, the return and the original exit line, they're usually buried underground, and if we're at the Sibugagi site, maybe we wanna just verify whether there's gonna be any digging.
Mm-hmm.
Just, that would be the only concern I would think of.
Right, and that would certainly be part of our review and the site restrictions. I think if they needed to install something like that, they'd have to likely go with an above ground insulated, duct for those pipes.
Okay. Any other questions on that? And we'll just wait, for Martin's review and some input, and we'll tell.
Well, I think if the committee's okay with it, nudging forward, Martin can give it a quick review to see if there's anything that says absolutely not, and he shouldn't even entertain the thought. Otherwise, unless there's something, that is just forbidden on the site, I think, we tell Mr. Finger to develop his proposal. He can work with, Frank and my engineering staff on making sure that we've addressed all of the, the facility concerns, the safety concerns, and then certainly we'll have to work with Martin's office on any contractual concerns. But barring any absolutely strong language on forbidding it, I think we would want them to develop, Mr. Finger to develop his proposal.
And the committee's preference, wanna grant an okay to go ahead, or?
Subject to Martin's review and
Subject
all
to-
applicable laws and
Okay, so we'll,
regulations are followed, whatever the right words are.
My thought is we'd be back to committee with a site plan and actual, installation plan. So, I think the key here is as Frank said, is
Conceptually.
conceptually, are we opposed to it? And if we're not opposed to it pending Martin's review, then develop your plan, and then we'll come back to committee with it, and we'll have, documents and,
so
all
this,
the details worked out.
this discussion was good enough for you to tell them to go proceed and
Yeah,
submit.
as I said, unless Martin sees something that is absolutely gonna be a concern for us, then he can develop his proposal.
Okay. All right, sounds good. And the solar proposals?
Just give the committee an update. We have, been reviewing the solar RFPs. These are for the Cornell Countryside, facility, as well as the town of Warrensburg well field up in Warrensburg. And we've received quite a, range of proposals. Part of the challenge that we knew we were in for is comparing apples to apples on these proposals. So we've got a series of questions we're gonna be asking, the proposers to clarify, what they submitted. So that is occurring and moving forward. I don't have a recommendation as yet. My hope is that we can work through that, bring a recommendation in the end of January. Obviously, nothing would proceed for installation until early spring anyway, so I think the time is well spent to get, better clarity on those proposals. So I'd anticipate again that we'd be back to committee in January with a recommendation. If any recommendation is viable, frankly.
Okay, and then, number 25, did you wanna do a?
Yeah, this, you'll see on the last page of the packet, a series of transfers.
Mr. Chairman?
I think there's a question.
I'm sorry, Mark.
That's all right, Mr. Chairman. I would just ask for these solar, proposals, when it comes time for us to meet and vote on them, that we have an opportunity to review them prior to the meeting, so we're not handed the proposals in the meeting and asked to vote in that meeting. Can we at least have 5 days to 10 days to
Yeah,
get
that-
them and review them beforehand?
That's a good question, because I think it's all new, and that's what's happening with the engineerings. They're doing their diligence now to make sure that we don't step on our toes, so could you follow that guideline with Mark so that we understand, how we're proceeding or how we're not proceeding?
Yeah, I think there's already been some requests for copies of the proposals. And, one of the challenges is that, some of these firms consider portions of their proposals, business confidential. So, as I understand, Martin can certainly chime in, when it comes to providing copies of the proposals to elected officials that will keep those proposals confidential, we can do that immediately. And I think some have already been provided to certain supervisors that have requested it. At the same time, any of the clarifications or questions and answers that are conducted between now and the next time we review in a committee, I can provide copies. Again, some of which would likely be confidential, so as long as they're staying within elected officials and county officers, I think we're fine. And that information can be shared now. So if any of the committee members or board members would like copies of those immediately, we can provide copies of everything. I'll warn you that they are all over the map as far as, understanding them. And one of the challenges with these proposals is there are certain assumptions made, and there's a range of legitimate and reasonable assumptions. And depending on how these firms want to present their projections into the, we're talking about 20-year terms. If they show a huge increase in electricity cost, and this electricity, this new solar PV grid is gonna reduce that, then they're showing a huge amount of savings. Another firm may have a comparable system that is just as good a system, but they didn't project the increase in electricity costs over the next 20 years quite as drastic. So they show a smaller savings, although they're the same systems, or maybe that system is even better than the one that's showing huge savings. So that's just one example of many areas where we're relying on Clark Patterson, their engineers' involvement, and Kevin and his staff in engineering to review and understand the differences, try and get the proposals on a comparable playing field, to use similar assumptions so that we can compare apples to apples. I'll just warn you if you want to draw conclusions, please just consult with me or my staff, and we can certainly share information as we go forward to make sure that we have all of the information necessary to make a good decision end of January.
John?
Well, two things. One is, I've been through these kind of things, and I've always told them, anything that you submit to me is foilable. Generally speaking. You submit a bid proposal to me, that's foilable. That's within the public realm. So I tell them that ahead of time. And that's per, Bob Hafner. And the other thing is there will be a lot of confusion over this, and you get, some of them depend on market rates, and their projections, whether that be real or not, and then others have a formula that's fixed, and regardless of the market, you're guaranteed certain values. But, that may not be as attractive up front, because some of the others base theirs on market value and put their best foot forward and say, well, here's your savings. So, you're right, comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges in this solar field is not an easy thing to do. But again, I'm inclined to go with the formulas that guarantee, regardless of the market rates, guarantee some kind of savings. But, that's just my 2 cents.
Brett?
That's what I was gonna say, is that it seems to me it should be based on a percentage savings over what the utility rate is in the area. But that's not the way the RFP was written.
The RFP was quite broad in that we didn't wanna pigeonhole, the proposers into a certain type of system or type of agreement. We wanted to keep everything on the table and find the best, possible deal for the county and for those agencies that are on site there, so. As we move forward, this is a, somewhat of this is a professional service. This is something that we can develop as we go forward. As I said, if anyone would like to see the proposals as they stand now, I'd be happy to provide copies and get anyone's input.
You wanna, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm maybe just looking for clarification, just so we know. I think, though, that if I understood the request as it originally came out, was there will be a presentation to this committee, presumably at the end of January. And I guess what I heard is there going to be, can we mail out that presentation essentially 5 days ahead of time? So that the committee members have a chance to review it before the committee meeting?
My intent would be as soon as it is ready and we feel that, okay, this is enough information to review, we would get it right out to the committee.
But not later than 5 days?
If it's ready 5 days prior to committee, it would be put out as soon as it's ready. If it's ready 3 days, then our choice is either we review it or we wait another month, which is an option as well. The committee can certainly wait until end of February to review anything.
Mr. Chairman. Go ahead, Marshall.
My understanding is that there were 5 proposals. 2 out of that 5, are, those proposers, do not maintain that any of the information, as far as I understand, do not maintain that any information in those proposals is confidential, trade secret, proprietary, or impacts their competitive, position. 3 out of the 5 proposals, I'm very aware, maintain that. And I've spent a considerable amount of time on those proposals, considerable amount of legal research, a considerable amount of time with Julie on those, and a considerable amount of time communications with each of the proposers and or their counsel in one instance. So I guess I just wanted to say that I wanted to sort of prepare everyone. I think there's going to come a time when you're going to be discussing, certainly you're going to be getting a presentation. But as I understand the Freedom of Information Law and what we need to do, I think there's going to be a time when we are going to be discussing at least portions of these proposals, which may be proprietary, trade secret, competitive information. We're going to be discussing those in executive session. And I just wanted to alert everybody to that. There doesn't come a time when we just wave a magic wand and these things become public for everyone. That's just not the way. That's not the way this is going to work from my legal perspective. And so that would go to the presentation that Jeff is going to put together as well. That is going to be viewed as confidential, in my view, until you're ready to come out and, at least in part, until you're ready to come out and say, this is the direction that we're heading in. I just wanted to give everybody a kind of a warning about that. Jim?
Yeah, I don't know that much about solar energy, but the one thing that sort of concerns me is the possibility that, say, 5 or 10 years, someone's gonna come out with a better technology that saves considerably more energy for solar energy. Has anyone looked at I know the industry is maturing, but it's like the computer industry where it doubles capacity every year and a half. Is it going like that? I mean, or is it more stretched out, or, are we sort of locking ourselves into something that in 5 or 10 years might, be, obsolete or whatever?
Yeah?
Part of that depends on the contract. I mean, you can work out a contract where it can be reopened at 5 years, and it might be the best interest in both parties to go with the better solar cells that are out at that time, because they make money, we make more money.
Okay.
So it's in both of our interests. So you leave a clause in there that allows you to reopen this every so often, so that, if the market, and it does change in that field.
Right.
And
Well, you're getting at my next question.
well, if you buy the solar cells, then you are gonna be caught with a product, because you own it. Right. And you're gonna have to maintain them. And then you can't just hire anybody off the street to maintain them. I mean, you have to hire the people that know what they're doing, and so forth. So, you know, but so, it depends on the contract.
Right.
Jeff?
I would just say that in short, I'm sure the technology will continue to get better. I'm sure the panels will continue to be more efficient. So the question is it, do we wanna wait for the next best thing, or do we take the best that's available and maybe incorporate something today? When it comes to technology like this, you could perpetually be waiting for the next best thing, and it's gonna keep coming.
Yeah, the thing is, you need to hedge your bet, so to speak, you need to do exactly what John's talking about, which is what my next question was gonna be.
Yeah, I got a friend of mine, he won't buy a flat screen TV. He says, when I buy one, 6 months later, it's already outdated. I want the most recent one. I said, you're gonna be chasing that forever. So he's still got the tube there, and he watches his 19-inch tube.
You should just go to Sears and watch TV at Sears, cause they're always changing the models in the store.
There you go.
I think you had, I think you had something to mention about the,
We can share with you.
Warren County Historical Society, if you just want to.
Yes, just briefly, wanna make the committee aware that we had been approached by the Warren County Historical Society. They are developing a proposal that, not quite ready yet, but they are looking at some of the county space to include the buildings over on, Gurney Lane. And, we met with them briefly, they are interested in possibilities for the future, so we don't have anything to report as yet, but those discussions have at least initiated. When we get far enough along where, we have enough information and, the Historical Society is ready to move ahead formally, then we'll be back to committee.
Evelyn?
Did we do the transfers or did we miss them? I don't wanna leave today if we haven't done them because that would be bad.
You don't want to get the call back, huh?
Yes.
Huh?
Page 25, this is a series of transfers. This is within the budget transfers to make sure that we're covering all our expense codes.
And Evelyn's making that motion, seconded by John. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All
I'll
right.
just add regarding that, I am anticipating more transfers before finance, as I reported to the DPW committee last week. This has been a very challenging year of very tight budgets and continual transfers, so I do anticipate even more prior to finance.
Okay. Any other business to come before the Buildings and Grounds? Motion to adjourn, Evelyn, second by John, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So moved.
Yeah, I'd be alarmed if they started showing up here. Maybe we should call Dave.